They thought Thermopylae ended with 300 dead Spartans. They were wrong. 10 years later, 10,000 Spartans marched with one purpose: to make Persia bleed for every fallen brother. What happened next wasn't battle, it was annihilation. The revenge Persia never saw coming. In 480 BCE, the narrow mountain pass at Thermopylae became a defining wound in the Greek world, an event that shaped the identity, determination, and fears of an entire generation. The battle lasted only 3 days, yet its memory would haunt Greece for a decade. The Spartans who fell there, led by King Leonidas, did not die in obscurity. Their stand became a symbol of heroic resistance, but also a reminder of how close Greece had come to annihilation. Thermopylae did not simply mark a defeat. It marked a trauma that Greece never fully escaped. The pass had been chosen for its defensive value, but once the Persians outflanked the position, the fate of Leonidas and his remaining companions was sealed. Their deaths were not meaningless, but the cost was undeniable. Xerxes' army now had a clear path into central Greece, and the fear that followed swept across the cities like a cold wind. In Athens, citizens abandoned their homes and gathered on ships, watching from the water as Persian forces marched into the city. Temples were burned, sacred sites desecrated, and the Acropolis, proud symbol of Athenian belief, fell in flames. The destruction sent a powerful message: resistance had consequences. Across the Peloponnese, the emotional impact of Thermopylae took on a different form. In Sparta, the death of Leonidas was more than the loss of a king, it was a personal and political crisis. Leonidas' sacrifice fulfilled the Spartan code of honor, yet it also left the city without its most respected leader in the midst of the greatest threat Greece had ever faced. The Spartans mourned their king, but mourning did not erase the responsibility placed on their shoulders. Leonidas' young son, Pleistarchus, was too young to rule, and governance fell to his guardian and regent, Pausanias. Pausanias was not chosen because he sought power. He became regent because duty required it. He inherited not only the authority to lead, but the emotional burden of fulfilling what Leonidas had begun. The memory of the 300 and the expectations of Spartan society rested heavily on him. Pausanias had not been present at Thermopylae, but he lived every day under its shadow. His role as regent meant carrying the legacy of a man who had become, in Greek memory, almost mythic. The wound of Thermopylae was felt in every Greek city-state, but it cut deepest in Sparta. The fallen warriors were not anonymous soldiers. They were fathers, brothers, and mentors whose absence reshaped the community. When news of the battle reached Sparta, the grief was tempered by a cultural expectation that valor in death was the highest achievement. Yet even within this framework of honor, the losses were deeply personal. The message carried back from the past was simple: the Persians were advancing, and Greece was not ready. As Xerxes' army continued its campaign, the destruction across Greece reinforced the idea that the sacrifice at Thermopylae had bought only time. Entire regions were overrun. Cities that had existed for centuries were reduced to ash. The psychological toll on the Greek world was severe. Thermopylae had shown that courage alone could not stop the Persian war machine. The invasion forced Greeks to confront a harsh reality. Unity was no longer optional. It was the sole condition for survival. In the decade that followed, Thermopylae became more than a memory. It became a warning and a motivation. Families who had lost sons to the battle carried that loss into every political discussion, every military decision. The surviving veterans of earlier campaigns spoke of Leonidas with reverence, using his legacy to inspire younger men who had grown up hearing only stories of the Persian advance. The defeat at Thermopylae was not simply a military event, it shaped a generation's sense of identity. By the time Mardonius, Xerxes' commander, returned to Greece the following year and later positioned his forces in central Greece, the emotional landscape of the Greek world had changed. Greece had been wounded, but not broken. The Persians believed that internal divisions would prevent any unified response. They saw quarrels between city-states as permanent fractures. What they misunderstood was the depth of the memory of Thermopylae and the collective determination it created. Pausanias emerged as the figure who would lead this transformation. Though he acted with the restraint expected of a Spartan regent, the weight of Thermopylae shaped his decisions. He understood that the next confrontation with Persia would not simply be another battle. It would be an opportunity to restore Greek confidence and to honor the sacrifices made at the mountain pass. His leadership was rooted in obligation to Sparta, to Leonidas, and to the idea that Greece could not afford another defeat. As the Greeks prepared to confront Persia once more, Thermopylae remained the ever-present reminder of what failure meant. The memory of the fallen 300 shaped strategy, reinforced unity, and sharpened resolve. The Greeks believed they were fighting not only for their cities, but for the legacy of those who had died resisting Xerxes' advance. Persia believed Greece was broken. They never imagined what marched toward them. In the years following the Persian invasion, Greece began assembling a force unlike anything it had fielded before. This new army was not formed overnight. It emerged gradually as the memory of Thermopylae hardened into long-term resolve. By 479 BCE, when the Greeks prepared for a decisive confrontation, Sparta took the lead in assembling the land force. At its core stood 10,000 Spartan hoplite citizens trained for war from childhood, shaped by a system that demanded discipline above all else. Many of these Spartans were veterans who had fought alongside Leonidas during earlier campaigns or had trained directly under those who fell at Thermopylae. Their presence gave the army more than military strength. It created continuity between the sacrifice at Thermopylae and the campaign now unfolding. Spartan society viewed military readiness as a civic responsibility, and these 10,000 embodied that ideal. They marched not for expansion or wealth, but to defend a way of life threatened by foreign invasion. Their experiences and training made them the backbone of the Greek land force. But this Spartan corps did not march alone. The destruction of Athens in 480 BCE had reshaped the political landscape. The Athenians, having evacuated their city and watched the Acropolis burn, carried a sense of anger and loss that translated into fierce determination. Their participation in the new campaign was not a matter of choice, it was an act of necessity. Under the leadership of Aristides, known for his integrity and strategic insight, 8,000 Athenian hoplites joined the force. For them, the war was personal. They fought for the restoration of their city and the security of their families. Beyond Sparta and Athens, the call for unity reached across the Greek world. Many city-states that had feuded for generations now recognized the scale of the threat Persia posed. Corinth, Megara, Plataea, and other polities contributed soldiers, forming a coalition unlike any previous alliance. This unity did not erase old rivalries, but it superseded them. Greek leaders understood that Persia's strength was rooted in the sheer size and diversity of its empire. To match this, the Greeks needed to combine their fragmented forces into a single, coordinated army. Each city-state brought its own traditions, tactics, and motivations. Plataea, whose lands would become the site of the decisive battle, contributed men committed to defending their homeland. Corinthian forces sought to demonstrate their relevance in Greek affairs, while Megarians aimed to prove their courage. After suffering heavily in earlier invasions, the coalition that formed was imperfect, but its existence alone demonstrated a major shift. For the first time on such a large scale, Greek identity superseded local loyalties. In assembling the army, the Greeks relied on the hoplite system that defined their warfare. Hoplites fought in a phalanx formation, tight lines of armored infantry, whose strength lay in discipline and cohesion. Their equipment reflected this purpose. Each soldier carried a heavy bronze breastplate, greaves, a helmet, and a large round shield known as the hoplon. This shield, weighing roughly 7 to 8 kilograms, was designed not only for individual protection, but also to support the soldier standing to the left. In a well-trained phalanx, shields overlapped, forming a defensive wall capable of absorbing significant force. The primary offensive weapon of the hoplite was the dory, a spear averaging around 8 to 12 feet in length. Its reach allowed Greeks to strike before their opponents could close the distance, an advantage that became crucial against Persian infantry. The Persians often fought with shorter spears, wicker shields, and lighter armor. While this gave them mobility, it left them vulnerable in close combat. The Greek hoplite system was built for straightforward, disciplined engagement, precisely the type of fighting that would come to define the battle ahead. On the Persian side, the scale of forces dwarfed anything the Greeks could assemble. Mardonius commanded an army drawn from across the vast Achaemenid Empire. Among them were the Immortals, the elite infantry unit renowned for their skill and status. Their name reflected the practice of immediately replacing any fallen member, maintaining the unit's strength at a constant level. Alongside them stood Median infantry, skilled archers from the Iranian plateau, and Egyptian spearmen noted for their toughness and battlefield discipline. The Persian cavalry, particularly from Bactria and other eastern provinces, added further strength. Some estimates place the total Persian force at over 100,000, though ancient numbers often carry exaggeration. What remains clear is that the Persians outnumbered the Greeks significantly. This disparity created a sense of David versus Goliath throughout the Greek ranks. Yet the Greeks did not rely on numbers, they relied on cohesion, equipment, and terrain. Their phalanx formation neutralized some of the advantages Persian cavalry might have had on open plains. Their armor protected them against the arrows that formed a major part of Persian strategy. Their spears allowed them to dictate the range of combat. Most importantly, they fought as citizens defending their homes, not as subjects fulfilling imperial demands. The unity of the Greek army was not absolute, but its formation marked a historical turning point. City-states that had once viewed each other as rivals now lined up shoulder to shoulder, recognizing that Persian domination would extinguish their autonomy. The destruction of Athens and the memory of Thermopylae created urgency that overcame internal divisions. The presence of 10,000 Spartans symbolized the seriousness of the campaign, while the contributions from other regions demonstrated shared commitment. As the army marched toward what would become the Battle of Plataea, there was a growing recognition that this force represented more than military strength. It represented a collective decision to preserve the independence of the Greek world. The stakes extended beyond territory or political influence. They concerned the continuation of a cultural identity rooted in local governance, civic duty, and communal values. Numbers favored Persia, but numbers alone do not determine outcomes. In the months ahead, a single mistake made by either side would determine the future of the Greek world. In the months leading to the Battle of Plataea, Persian strategy was shaped by a confidence that bordered on inevitability. The Achaemenid Empire had already crossed continents, subdued kingdoms, and commanded resources unmatched anywhere in the ancient world. After Thermopylae and the burning of Athens, Persian leaders believed the Greek resistance was fractured beyond repair. Their assessment was not entirely unreasonable. Internal rivalries, political tensions, and regional disagreements had long undermined Greek unity. For Mardonius, the Persian commander left behind by Xerxes to complete the conquest of Greece, these divisions appeared to represent an opportunity rather than a threat. Mardonius was an experienced general, well connected within the royal court, and personally trusted by Xerxes. He had led earlier campaigns in Macedonia and Thrace, and his appointment reflected a belief that he could accomplish what the king had left unfinished. Yet beneath the surface of his confidence lay a critical misunderstanding of the Greek situation. Persian strategy assumed that the Greeks would remain disorganized, reacting city by city rather than as a unified state. This assumption would become the first in a chain of errors that altered the course of the war. One of the most consequential decisions Mardonius made was abandoning the strong defensive position he initially occupied in Thessaly. The region offered favorable terrain for Persian cavalry, reliable supply lines, and strategic depth. Remaining there would have forced the Greeks to undertake a costly, prolonged campaign to dislodge him if they could dislodge him at all. Instead, Mardonius advanced southward into central Greece. His movement was partly political. He hoped to draw Athens away from the Greek alliance by offering favorable terms. When the Athenians refused, even after the destruction of their city, Mardonius pressed deeper into Greek territory. This advance brought the Persian army into Boeotia, where the plains near Plataea offered open ground well suited for cavalry maneuvers. The choice of battlefield might seem consistent with Persian strengths, yet it also exposed the army to intelligence vulnerabilities. The Thebans, who had chosen to align themselves with Persia, provided Persian leadership with political support but also introduced new risks. Greek informants sympathetic to the allied cause operated within Boeotian territory, collecting information on Persian troop movements, supply conditions, and strategic intentions. Among these informants, the figure of Alexander I of Macedon stands out. Though officially a Persian vassal, Alexander maintained close cultural ties with the Greek world. Ancient sources record that he secretly warned the Greek coalition of Persian plans, encouraging them to stand united. While the full extent of his influence is debated, it is clear that leaked intelligence undermined Persian strategic secrecy. Mardonius did not fully grasp how much the Greeks knew about his intentions. As Persian forces settled near the Asopus River, Mardonius believed he held both tactical and psychological superiority. He viewed the Greek alliance as fragile, an assessment supported by historical precedent. City-states such as Corinth, Megara, and Athens had long-standing rivalries, and Sparta had often acted independently. Persian strategy had successfully exploited Greek divisions in the past, and Mardonius expected the same outcome again. He anticipated defections, disagreements, and delays that would paralyze Greek decision-making. But this time, Persian expectations diverged drastically from reality. The destruction inflicted by Xerxes' campaign had created a shared sense of urgency. The Greek alliance, though imperfect, could not afford internal fractures. Mardonius misread this shift. He assumed that the political culture of Greece would prevent sustained cooperation, not realizing that the trauma of the previous year had transformed regional rivalries into collective resolve. Within the Greek ranks, however, doubts remained. City-states debated tactics, leadership, and risks. The Persians interpreted these discussions as signs of weakness. Mardonius believed he could provoke further division through strategic pressure, including the destruction of farmland and continued raids. He measured Greek cohesion by earlier conflicts, not by the present reality. It was a miscalculation with profound consequences. 3 key questions emerged during this period, questions that would shape the logic of the coming battle. The first was why Mardonius abandoned his defensible position in Thessaly. His move south inadvertently created an opportunity for the Greek coalition. By exposing his army to a more open region with limited natural barriers, he allowed the Greeks to position themselves in ways that forced him to fight on terms that were not entirely his own. The decision remains one of the most debated choices of the campaign. The second question concerned the secret message that reached Sparta shortly before the final mobilization. The information, reportedly carried by Alexander of Macedon, reinforced the urgency of Greek unity and warned that Persia intended to exploit internal divisions. Whether the message altered Spartan plans or merely confirmed their strategy, it played a psychological role in accelerating preparations for battle. The third question centered on how the Greeks managed to convert internal debates and occasional confusion into effective coordination. Persian commanders believed Greek disagreements would weaken their ability to respond quickly. Instead, the coalition developed a flexible approach that allowed individual contingents to operate within a broader strategic framework. This adaptability would become crucial once the armies met on the battlefield. Mardonius entered the final phase of the campaign with confidence rooted in past experience, numerical superiority, and the assumption of Greek disunity. What he did not recognize was that the conditions had changed. Greek determination, shaped by the memory of Thermopylae and the devastation of their lands, had forged a level of cohesion rare in their history. The Persians believed the Greek alliance was fragile. They did not see how close it had come to consolidating into the most decisive force they would ever face. But the night before the battle, Greece nearly destroyed itself. The turning point came not with swords or shields, but with water. The spring behind the Greek lines, one of the few sources sustaining 40,000 men, was discovered by Persian cavalry. When they found it, they fouled it deliberately, throwing in dead horses, debris, and earth. It was a calculated move meant to force a reaction, and it succeeded. Under the August heat, dehydration became as dangerous as any spearpoint. Pausanias had no choice. The army had to move before dawn. What followed was one of the most precarious maneuvers in Greek military history. A full withdrawal at night, across uneven ground, with no torches allowed. Silence was essential. Coordination was critical. The consequences of failure were catastrophic. But the night did not unfold as planned. Units separated in the darkness, losing contact as they shifted across ravines and rocky slopes. Commanders misunderstood orders or received them late. The Athenians drifted farther than intended toward their assigned position. The center of the Greek line, several city-state contingents became disoriented and vanished into the olive groves entirely. The greatest crisis came from within the Spartan ranks. A captain named Leonidas refused to withdraw at all, insisting that Spartans never retreated before an enemy. His defiance delayed the movement of the entire Spartan wing. Pausanias argued, pleaded, then threatened, but the delay had already fractured the alignment of the army. Persian scouts observed the darkened landscape from a distance. They heard nothing, no marching, no clashing of armor, no shouted commands. The silence was unnerving. It led to a single, dangerous conclusion. Either the Greeks were fleeing or inviting a trap. Which one? They could not yet tell. By first light, the truth became visible. The Greek line, once unified across the foothills, was shattered. Spartans stood isolated on a ridge, cut off from the Athenians by nearly 3 miles. The center was nowhere to be seen. The coalition that had survived political divisions, weeks of attrition, and Persian pressure now looked broken beyond repair. This was the moment Persia had been waiting for. At dawn, Persia believed the gods had handed them victory. But the gods weren't done yet. When Mardonius saw the disarray in the Greek line, he acted immediately. Persian cavalry surged forward, exploiting the broken formation. Mounted archers swept across the plain, releasing volleys that rained down on the isolated Spartans. Arrows clattered against bronze shields and helmets. Men fell where they stood. Yet the Spartan line did not move. They remained motionless, shields locked, absorbing the assault without breaking formation. The delay came from a law older than Sparta itself. Greek religious practice forbade engaging in battle until favorable omens appeared in the sacrificial readings. Priests examined the victims repeatedly. Each time, the signs were unfavorable. Pausanias could not order in advance, even as men were dying around him. Among those struck was Callicrates, considered by many the most handsome warrior in the army. An arrow pierced his chest, and as he collapsed, he lamented not that he would die, but that he would die without having struck a blow for Greece. His words echoed the mindset of the phalanx. Honor was found not in survival, but in service. Across the field, the Athenians saw the dust clouds rising from the Spartan position. They knew their allies were under devastating attack, but between them stood the bulk of the Persian infantry. To reach the Spartans required moving directly into the teeth of the Persian center. Then nature intervened. The rising sun positioned itself behind the Greeks, blinding Persian troops with harsh, direct light. Archers struggled to aim. Cavalry had difficulty coordinating charges. It was a small shift, but on ancient battlefields, such changes mattered. From the olive groves, the missing Greek center finally reappeared, reforming in fragmented clusters that gradually realigned toward the front line. The coalition that hours earlier seemed on the verge of collapse was reassembling itself piece by piece. At this precise moment, the priests reported a dramatic change. The omens had turned favorable. Pausanias raised his hands, signaling to the Spartan ranks. There was no speech, no appeal to emotion. A single command was enough. Now, 11,500 Greek spears dropped into position. The phalanx that had appeared broken now surged forward as one. The Persian infantry, expecting to finish a scattered enemy, suddenly faced the full force of the most disciplined heavy infantry in the ancient world. The reckoning had begun. But one death, one man would decide the fate of empires. Mardonius recognized immediately that the Spartan charge threatened to break the momentum. He had seized at dawn. Rather than order a measured withdrawal or reposition his cavalry, he chose a more personal course of action. He gathered the elite Persian guard, the immortals, and led them forward in a decisive counterattack, aimed directly at the Spartan wing. As the two forces closed, Mardonius made a fateful choice. He dismounted. Persian generals traditionally commanded from horseback, but in this moment he believed leadership required his physical presence at the front. His golden armor, white horse, and purple cloak had long made him a recognizable figure. On foot, among clustered infantry, he became even easier to identify. Spartan veterans who had trained under Leonidas needed no introduction. They had memorized the image of the man responsible for the destruction of Athens and the deaths at Thermopylae. Once they saw him, the focus of the phalanx shifted like iron drawn toward a magnet. The immortals fought with discipline and courage, but the constricted terrain and the sheer weight of the advancing hoplites gradually compressed them. Shields crushed together, spears jabbed through gaps. The pressure was relentless. Step by step, the Persians were pushed onto the bodies of their own fallen. At the center of this struggle, Mardonius urged his troops forward, but the line was collapsing. In the chaos, bronze grinding against wicker shields, dust rising in choking clouds, a single Spartan spear found its mark. Ancient accounts differ on who delivered the blow, but all agree on its accuracy. The spear struck Mardonius in the head, piercing his helmet and bringing him down instantly. His death had an impact far greater than the fall of any ordinary commander. Persian morale, already strained by the collision with the phalanx, shattered at the sight. What had been a coordinated resistance dissolved into panic. Units began to withdraw, then to flee. At that moment, Pausanias ordered the emblem that would break Persia's last hope. Mardonius' golden helmet, now removed from the fallen commander, was raised high above the Spartan ranks. Across the battlefield, Greeks saw it as confirmation of victory. Persians saw it as the end. The empire's greatest army broke, but the Spartans were not done. The death of Mardonius did not simply break the Persian line, it shattered the will of an entire army. What had begun as a confident advance now collapsed into panic. Tens of thousands of Persian infantry, archers, and auxiliaries turned from battle and fled toward the Asopos River. hoping its shallow crossing would offer escape. Instead, it became a trap from which almost none would return. The first wave plunged into the water, but the press of bodies behind them made movement impossible. As more soldiers crowded the banks, the riverbed clogged with the fallen. Shields, armor, and corpses formed barriers that slowed the living and trapped the wounded beneath the surface. What should have been a crossing turned into a suffocating crush. The river's flow weakened, blocked by the sheer mass of bodies. An unintended dam built from panic and desperation. Persian cavalry, normally the empire's most effective arm, found themselves helpless. The soft mud along the bank swallowed hooves, broke formation, and left riders struggling to maneuver. Horses fell, throwing their riders onto the trampled ground. Many were overtaken before they could remount. Without mobility, the cavalry became as vulnerable as the infantry they were trying to protect. Across the plain, the Greeks advanced not with fury, but with deliberate precision. Hoplites moved in disciplined steps, their formation steady as they pushed the fleeing Persians back toward the river. Each advance extended the reach of their spears. Each pause tightened the trap. It was not a chaotic chase but a systematic pursuit, the culmination of years of trauma, loss, and determination. When the survivors reached the Persian camp, a fortified square built of timber walls, they believed they had found safety. Instead, it became the final stage of the slaughter. Greek forces struck the walls with the force of a battering ram. The thin wooden palisades, never intended to withstand a concentrated assault, snapped under the weight of shields and bodies. Hoplites poured inside. Archaeology later confirmed what ancient writers hinted at: layers of ash, thousands of arrowheads, signs of close quarters combat so intense that the dead fell in heaps. The Persians inside, soldiers, attendants, and camp followers, fought or surrendered, but the outcome was the same. The Greeks, driven by years of devastation, did not relent. At the center of the camp, the Persian second in command, Mecisteus, made his last stand. Already wounded from earlier fighting, he held his ground until overwhelmed. His death extinguished the final spark of organized resistance. Of the original 100,000 Persians who had marched onto the plain of Plataea, perhaps 10,000 survived. The rest lay dead along the river, across the fields, or within the shattered walls of their own camp. But revenge wasn't the true victory. Something far greater was born that day. When the battle ended, the Greeks faced a landscape transformed by war. Tens of thousands of bodies lay across the plain, from the shallow riverbanks to the foothills of Mount Sidharan. Though victory had been absolute, respect for ritual and tradition remained. Greek soldiers gathered their own dead first. Each city-state constructed a burial mound for its fallen, honoring the men who had stood together in one of the most consequential battles of the ancient world. These mounds, Spartan, Athenian, and others, would endure for centuries as reminders of shared sacrifice. The Persian dead received different treatment. Their bodies were stripped of armor, weapons, and valuables, as was customary in ancient warfare. Despite the magnitude of the slaughter, Pausanias maintained order, insisting that the spoils be collected and divided fairly. From gold vessels and fine fabrics to coinage drawn from dozens of subject nations, the wealth discovered in the camp revealed the staggering luxury that had accompanied Persia's campaign. A portion went to the oracle at Delphi. The rest was distributed among the Greek contingents according to contribution and loss. Yet material wealth was not the most profound outcome of Plataea. Greek veterans returned home carrying psychological scars. Men who had fought in the phalanx spoke of the crushing pressure of bodies, the sound of bronze piercing flesh, and the suffocating heat beneath their helmets. They had seen an army dissolve in front of them, had taken part in a pursuit that bordered on annihilation. These experiences shaped their communities for generations. Politically, the victory rearranged the balance of power in Greece. City-states that had wavered or supported Persia found themselves isolated or punished. Others, particularly Athens, emerged with newfound confidence. Within a decade, Athens began rebuilding on an unprecedented scale. Temples rose again on the Acropolis. Democratic institutions strengthened. Art, drama, and philosophy flourished. Under the protection of a Greece no longer threatened by the empire across the sea. Historians later described this period as the beginning of the Golden Age of Athens. The thinkers who shaped Western intellectual tradition, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, would come in its wake. The architectural and artistic achievements of the Parthenon echoed the belief that the city had been reborn from fire. Thermopylae had asked the question, was freedom worth dying for? Plataea delivered the answer. The united Greek army proved that freedom was also worth fighting for and winning at unimaginable cost. The consequences of that day extended far beyond revenge. The battle preserved the independence of the Greek city-states, allowing the cultural foundations of Western civilization to take shape. Democracy, rational inquiry, and civic identity all found fertile ground because Persia's advance was stopped. From bronze and blood came the possibility of a new world. Civilization itself had been shaped by the resolve of a few thousand men who stood their ground. When the dust settled on the plain of Plataea, Greece stood victorious, but the true significance of the battle stretched far beyond the bodies left on the field. Plataea was not only the end of a Persian invasion, it was the moment a civilization defined itself. A generation earlier, at Thermopylae, Greece had asked whether freedom was worth dying for. At Plataea, the answer came in bronze and blood. Across the scorched earth, funeral mounds rose for the fallen. These were not just graves, they were statements. They marked the place where ordinary farmers, craftsmen, and citizens stood against the greatest empire of their age and refused to yield. In the days that followed, Greek commanders reflected not only on the victory, but on the responsibility it carried. Pausanias himself chose restraint, refusing to desecrate Mardonius' body, reminding his men that even in triumph, they fought to uphold values, not abandon them. The consequences rippled across the ancient world. Never again would Persia attempt a full invasion of mainland Greece. The Aegean would belong to Greek fleets. The land armies of the city-states, once divided by rivalries, would stand as a warning to any who believed sheer numbers could suppress a free people. From this security, something remarkable emerged. Athens rebuilt from its ashes and entered its golden age. The philosophies that shaped Western thought, Socratic inquiry, Platonic ideals, Aristotelian logic, grew in the space carved out by that victory. Architecture, drama, political theory, and scientific curiosity flourished because a single day in 479 BCE ensured they could exist at all. Plataea reminds us that history hinges on narrow moments: one night march, one broken line, one spear thrown at exactly the right instant. Had Greece fallen that day, the ideas that later guided Rome, influenced the Renaissance, and shaped the modern democratic world might never have taken root. The battle was more than revenge for Thermopylae, it was a turning point for human civilization. The Spartans and their allies did not merely defend their homeland, they safeguarded a set of ideas: freedom, citizenship, debate, and the value of the individual that would echo across thousands of years. Civilization advanced because a few thousand men held the line, and in doing so, they reshaped the world.